Hello and welcome to the Pearls of Wisdom podcast. Now, today we have a very special guest. This is someone I've known for years. We've worked together in central government. I really, really rate what Aytan has to say. His knowledge, his expertise is top of his tree in so many different areas. You are going to love this interview because what he has to share will be absolutely brilliant. So without further ado, I introduce you all to Aytan Hilton, who is the Director of Cubed Consultancy. Welcome, Aytan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Pearl. Thanks for the kind and warm intro. Thank you.
Well, I've been looking forward to this. You know, I've reached out a few times and your schedule has just been so busy. You bring so much information to everything you do. Anyone that follows you on LinkedIn and sees the posts that you put in, there's humour, there's information, there's knowledge, and it's not just in the area that you specialise in. It ranges across so many things. And to all the listeners, I say to you, get a pad and paper and take notes because you're going to get loads and loads of information. And as with all our guests, we will put ways that you can link with Aytan afterwards. It all goes into the description of the podcast. So make sure you reach out. Anyone that listens to this podcast will want to be reaching out, so make sure you're the head of the queue. So don't sit on it, don't wait, reach out as soon as you've got the contact details. So from that, I'm going to jump into our first question. Can you describe your career path to date, please?
Yes. So in a nutshell, I spent about 5 years or so in the agency world. I then spent a couple of years in RPO, so recruitment process outsourcing, and I spent the last 8 years or so in-house, client side, as an interim professional. So about 14 or 15 years all in all, and hopefully what I hope the sort of career path has done to date is a reasonably seamless transition from the supply world of agency into client side in-house value add to internal teams and stakeholders, and hopefully as I say, what that does is it offers clients and stakeholders and anyone I work with appreciation and empathy from all sides of the fence, rather than just necessarily sort of one-dimensional for 14 or 15 years.
And although you mentioned recruitment, it touches on everything else. It touches on engagement. It touches on employee value proposition and everything, where so many people say, oh, yes, recruitment. Unless you've actually been involved with it, you don't realise how many areas you touch on. You have to be a master of so many different roles to actually
absolutely
engage people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would definitely say that the first half of my career was probably the more traditional coal-face recruitment, transactional delivery. I'll admit to that. But you're absolutely right. The interim roles that I've had, although by title they link directly to recruitment or talent acquisition, they will always cross over with other corporate functions, other enabling functions, somewhat directly and indirectly in terms of marketing, brand, perception, values, diversity and inclusion, all things that, as I say, directly and indirectly happen through recruitment activities, talent acquisition strategies, models, short-term, long-term. So yes, you definitely have to be thinking more broadly than just, the right person for the right job, which is ultimately the goal. But how you get there is definitely much, much broader than some may imagine or appreciate.
And this is why I so wanted to have you as a guest on the podcast, because with COVID and people are seeing their roles change, some people might have lost their current role and be looking to where their next role could be coming from. They might want to pivot on their key skills and do something completely different. This is, again, where the listener needs to know, how will a recruiter approach this, and also how do they need to change the way they market themselves to be in front of the right audience?
Definitely, and I've seen this happening more and more with recruitment professionals that I've known for a number of years, perhaps have either worked with, maybe managed them, or even, you know, they've been recruiters supplying into the clients and projects that I've worked on. But you're absolutely right. The ones that kind of continue to offer not only the industry some value, but, you know, their own employers and their clients and their customers are definitely the ones that are remaining sort of tech savvy, remaining aware of what's going on in the world. You know, we don't often like to bring sort of politics into what we do, but the realities of what's going on in the world does have an influence on, you know, what companies are doing, how they want to be perceived, and the talent that they want to bring into their organizations, you know, is more than just competent individuals or technically proficient individuals. It's also about who they are, not so much personally, you know, that still remains, you know, somewhat private to what we do outside of work, but they definitely want to understand more about people's mindset, drivers and motivators, you know, a little bit more than perhaps they did a number of years ago.
Yep, totally agree with that. I'm going to move on to the next question. Now, can you name 3 things that made you choose your current career and why?
Sure. So, I mean, it is a cliche. I think, like many others, I fell into recruitment back in the day. But in terms of what that's become, and perhaps 3 of the reasons that I do kind of what I do today, one is around the independence of being an interim and a business owner. I think, you know, various tests and profiles that I've done over the years have all indicated that, you know, I'm a bit of not a lone wolf as such, but someone that definitely works best alone, rather than necessarily, you know, being told what to do within reason. I like the variety and the frequency of learning new things. Over the years, I've worked in probably 9 or 10 different sectors and industries. And I think definitely the nature of what I do, by choice and by design, allows for that. And the breadth and variety is something that definitely stimulates me to learn more. And finally, you know, being somewhat sector agnostic and not necessarily a vertical specialist, I've definitely kind of committed my career to becoming a subject matter expert, I think, as you may have mentioned earlier. And, you know, again, what that does is it gives clients confidence that, you know, what they're engaging me to do comes with, you know, 5, 6, 7 projects that are completely different, very much alike, in organizations large and small. But that's hopefully the value that I can bring to clients and projects, rather than saying, you know, I am a construction specialist or I am a life sciences specialist and I know those markets inside out. You know, I've chosen to be a recruitment specialist, you know, for the greater good of the companies I go into.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, like I've said to the listeners, you and I have worked together previously, and your knowledge, it is a whole process that you can literally unplug from one corporation and move it to the next. Because yes, although they might have a slightly different process, the overall process that you deliver can be adapted and grown depending on what their foundations are that you're going in to work with, and seeing where they want to go, where their 6-month, 12-month plan is taking them. You can put them on that journey and actually move them on. I mean, I know the stuff that you've shared with Cube Consultancy, that process you have is a plug and play for a lot of maybe the smaller companies. For the larger corporates, you go in on the consultant level or on the director level, and literally you can completely change their recruitment function so that it's actually working for what they want and getting the results that they need. And I for one, can vouch for that, because I've seen it happen time and time again when you're working with people.
Yeah, it's and again, you know, you do, you know, after 14 or 15 years, you do, you know, realize 3 or 4 common threads of challenges that organizations face, you know, large and small. You know, we talk about the scarcity of skills in the marketplace, you know, getting to top talent. How do you do it, you know, in an increasingly sort of engaging way, that's also purposeful. So yes, you know, although organizations will have their nuances and their intricacies, you know, whether it's regulated, whether it's geographically remote locations, etc. But the fundamental principles of what we're trying to do from a better practices, best practice perspective, that can be reasonably generic. And then once you go in and you kind of get under the skin of the projects and the clients and the stakeholders, that's when you start to tweak and tailor it more for their individual needs rather than just a blanket eat, sleep, repeat kind of approach.
Yep. And this is where your clients get such fantastic results, because you can do that and actually understanding their key message once they use those processes that you've known are tried and tested. And implement. Definitely. Now, you might have touched on bits of this. Can you let us know the key values that your business offers? For us, please.
So I was thinking about this question before we spoke, and I think the tricky thing with values is that organisations often try to have individual or independent values that are going to be different to any other organisation. And for me personally, as someone hopefully that's been brought up with good foundations of values anyway, that the values of my business, I guess, that I depend on. I think I might have mentioned 90% plus of my work is referral and recommendation. So hopefully these three values are pertinent therefore. But integrity, trust and commitment are the three sort of key values for me. One being, the integrity of your work, especially as an interim who is with an organisation for a relatively short period of time, has to have integrity both during and after the projects that you complete or are perhaps part of. Trust, I think, is paramount. Business without trust is going to come unstuck pretty quickly. And wholeheartedly, my personal commitment to people I work with, organisations I work with, networks, friends, family. Again, I'm quite a passionate person. I think, culturally as a Mediterranean, that kind of fire in the belly exists. But hopefully it comes out in the commitment of my work. And to that last point, I would also say that commitment can sometimes come through with the passion of what I'm saying, needs to be done. And because I truly believe it. So yeah, they're probably the three key values I adopt for my business.
Once again, I can concur with that, because having worked with you, I've seen the way you work and your values show through in everything you do. And like you say, like that trust thing, that's key with the people you're working with, and ultimately the people you want to engage with to bring in to maybe become potential employees of the companies you're working for. And if they don't have the trust, that's as big as the brand. It's almost people buy into a brand, but they buy in through the trust factor of what they believe that brand stands for. And it's actually understanding that message.
Yeah, I think you're right. In terms of the marketplaces that we work in, there are some huge, very, very established brands out there, much, much bigger consultancies with, a whole raft of capabilities and resources. And that's what we're competing against. And I think, as someone who has, various associate partners and relationships, it's no coincidence that the majority of those partners are relatively small businesses or independents. Their careers perhaps over 10, 15, 20 years may have seen them working in some of those big brands along the way. But actually, my personal belief is that clients can get as much, if not more, value from an independent consultant or a relatively small business that genuinely specialises in what they're doing, rather than necessarily these big shiny brands that have millions and maybe even hundreds of millions of pounds to play with. Yes, they've got great partner programs, they've got great training, and I can't fault those. But sometimes they become a little bit vanilla in that, where's the depth to what they're doing? It's kind of remanufactured over and over again. So I will consciously try and align myself with, independents that are, 15, 20 years into what they do. And that's genuinely the value that they add.
Yeah. And I totally agree, because I know from the journey that you and I have been on, I will go into large corporations, and especially from the comms and marketing side, and 9 times out of 10, those large corporations have outsourced their marketing to agencies, which all seems well and good, but they might speak to a director of an agency that wants to win the business, but that director doesn't work on the nitty gritty. They might have someone that's newly come in. Yes, they might understand the ideas behind it, but they don't fully understand what that corporation, what that company stands for. Whereas the likes of you and I and the independents and the smaller SMEs that you and I work with that will go in as an interim and deliver, we know that inside and out. We can actually connect with what that corporation message is. Sometimes the larger companies, the larger agencies, that message is lost. And you need someone like you and I to go in and actually bring that passion back, because that's one thing I don't always see from the large agencies. I don't know that they can convey the passion that you and I or an employee can share, where they're actually embedded within the company and what they live, breathe and feel every day. So that's where I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely spot on.
I'm going to now move on to this next question. Now, you will recognise it, because this question I tend to use if I'm working with CEOs and directors and I need a blog article. This is one of the questions I put in, but it's interesting to see what my guests give as an answer. Aytan, what keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, so I mean, this one was a relatively easy one to think about beforehand. I mean, quite simply, you know, business development is my Achilles heel. I don't know if it keeps me awake at night. I think because I've kind of made my peace with it over such a long period of time. But it does go back to my, you know, agency days as a 360 recruiter. I was never the biggest biller. You know, pretty average, you know, in a sales environment. And the reason for that was I just struggled to do the business development piece. And I think that's why I naturally progressed onto key account management. So my kind of second and third roles in recruitment were with, you know, the likes of TFL, Crossrail, Network Rail. You know, these were sort of 10 to 15 million pounds a year accounts that were warm accounts. We had lots of contractors working in there, but we still had to grow and develop those accounts. Whereas, you know, the organic growth for me was easier to do than that kind of cold calling, knocking on doors, and winning business, you know, from 0 to 360. So yeah, that has kind of followed me a little bit into my interim, you know, career and business. I kind of, I hate to admit to this, but I massively rely on my network to help me find work. You know, those referrals and recommendations, you know, I can't, well, I know how much they're worth in terms of the business it's got me, but, you know, they're 10 times more valuable, you know, because of the time and effort that I haven't had to go through to be demoralized that I'm not winning that work myself. So, you know, again, I think that goes back to the values of, if you do a good job each time, not to say that every project is perfect, but it will help you in the future. So for example, this week I had a call from a director that I've worked with twice before in the last 5 or 6 years, and potentially there's you know, some work maybe early into 2021 that, you know, we're discussing again. So yeah, it's something that, you know, I don't have to do a huge amount, thankfully, but that's what does keep me awake at night occasionally.
Yeah. And I can completely agree. When you do the interim route, yes, it's great whilst you're in that contract, but the mere fact that it's called a contract, you know it's going to end at a certain time. And you always have that bit, you're always nurturing those relationships to move forward. Where could the next role come from? But like you, yes, I rely on my network. And I like to think I stay in touch with most of them and sort of touch base and see what we're doing. But it's actually moving forward and knowing that you've gained the respect of those people you work with, that they want to work with you again. Some people I might not have spoken to for the last 5 years. And I found with COVID, when we've been in lockdown, they've been reaching out. I've got one person I worked with at National Grid, and that was in 2012. They are now taking part in the retreats I'm running and everything, because we reconnected, and it was like we hadn't even been a day away from each other, simply because we've stayed in touch. But that's the good networks. And yes, you know, you and I will introduce each other to networks and people that we think can benefit us. Doesn't always come back that same time. It might be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be 2 years in the future, but you know it's going to be repaid. I don't network, and neither do you, just because it's another number to add to the list. Yeah. You network with people because you can help each other. Might not be automatically and straight away, but you know it's going to be built on in the future, and that's what true networking is. Unfortunately, some networking, especially with the social media channels we use, it becomes almost like spam, where people connect for the sake of the numbers and they lose contact with communicating and actually building a relationship with it. So yes, completely agree with everything you've said there.
Good.
Right, I'm going to move on to the next thing, so that all the listeners can see how, when they're reaching out to work with you, how you work best. Where and how do you work best, Aytan?
Yeah, so I mean, the following answer will be a little bit of a contradiction, but I'll explain why. And also, again, the last kind of 6 months, which, you know, very gratefully I was working full time on a project with a client that concluded recently. The whole COVID situation has made me realise, you know, how I do work best. So a good question to ask. I think, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation today, I work best alone. However, I do work best alone amongst my stakeholders, peers, and customers. And the kind of caveat to that contradiction is that through workshops, through engagement, dialogue, and iteration is how I work best. And, you know, the last 6 months has included a lot of those, but obviously it's included them exclusively online. So I've never exclusively done a project remotely, although I do work from home or remotely, or travel to client offices or travel abroad. At least all of those elements coming together form the opportunity to meet in person, to run a workshop for half a day, to engage with users in their working environments. Doing that exclusively online did make me realise that, you know, working alone has its weaknesses, because you then have to engage people in a completely different way, keep their attention, you know, get their engagement and buy-in in a different way that, you know, I've not done before. So that did make me realise, you know, COVID or not, moving forward, you know, if we are all digital natives and digital nomads that, you know, might work 70-80% of the time virtually, that I do have to, you know, change my ways a little bit. Otherwise, you know, I'll fall behind. So, you know, that was an opportunity to sort of embrace, you know, you might have 4 1-hour sessions on Zoom or video conference rather than a 4-hour workshop, you know, physically with people around a table. So yeah, I think I would still like to work in as live an environment as possible. You know, I'm a bit old-fashioned in that sense, but at the same time, you have to be, I suppose, nimble and agile enough to, you know, get down with the kids and kind of do it how it's done today. So yeah, big learning curve the last 6 months. So yeah, I will change my ways a little bit, I guess.
I must admit, I mean, because, well, you know, I do digital comms. So when COVID came about, I thought, oh, everyone's going to want my services because I can help them. I'm still waiting. So this is a cry out to everyone, yes, to actually say, yes, you can implement it. I can see, I know that when we've done the interim thing, sometimes, yes, you go in the office and you and I know, give 150% and more when we're with the client. When you work from home, I've always found I do more work because of the fact that I'm at home. I feel as if I have to give even more to show that I am doing the work and still giving that amount of work to the client. But COVID has really made me think about well-being, where you say about that, how you work best. Yes, we connect with each other. As we're doing this interview, we're doing it over Zoom, so you can see body language and stuff like that. But I do wonder how much care people are taking of their own personal well-being, because and that's something to think about as well. And that I think is going to be a big question that people will ask as if this becomes the new norm.
Definitely. And, I've got a personal interest in psychology, and I try to bring some of that to my work. But I was talking to a psychologist earlier this week about all sorts, not from a professional therapy session, but just, having a chat. And that was one of the things we talked about. Although we've all embraced the way we've needed to work for the last 4, 5, 6 months, the genuine reality of if that was how it's going to be forevermore, that's quite a big difference to how we've lived and worked up until now, and to literally flip the switch and work like that forever, I think would eventually break a few people, because kids are back to school hopefully for normal now. People are starting to transition back to the office maybe 1 or 2 days a week. They're starting to travel a little bit more, perhaps more in the car rather than public transport, but they are traveling a bit more. So I think the realization of, roles that do rely on personal interaction or physical interaction, in an office for 4, 5, 6 hours a day, to have the spontaneity of ideas, conversations, outputs, rather than that kind of regimented, diarised Zoom calls. And it's quite it's not real to me. It's quite sort of fabricated. So yeah, again, it's a bit old-fashioned, but I know that when you're in a room and you just have that odd conversation, or you have a quick sandwich with someone and you chew the fat for 10 minutes, things happen. So I think outputs will change if we were to all work remotely forevermore. And that might take a generation to kind of, come to fruition and become as productive as we all want it to be.
Yep. Yes, definitely. Most definitely. Where you've covered sort of where and how do you work best, can you also let us know what tools do you use that makes your work life easier?
Yes, so there's I suppose there's two elements to this. One is the sort of, I suppose, business infrastructure that I have, and I'll be honest, it does rely heavily on synced Apple products mostly. But what I have done is this week I've got myself a new bit of kit, and I've committed to trying to do a lot of the things that I do perhaps on pen and paper on more digitized apps. And kind of embrace the fact that there is, technology out there that can, help me to communicate better, help me to keep in touch with people better, help me to kind of articulate ideas, digitally rather than manually. So I think, it's time I got a bit nerdier with what I do. And then the other side is, obviously, there's lots of technology that I help clients to implement or to introduce into their businesses. And again, some of those I wholeheartedly recommend on a regular basis, whether it's an ATS, whether it's a market mapping tool, whether it's a HR system. So again, there are some that I come across on a reasonably regular basis that, as I say, I'll hope happily, be a brand ambassador for. And, once you've put them into clients 2 or 3 times, it's not to say that when you make that recommendation the next time, you still offer clients comparators or alternatives, but you just say, look, this one I know inside out, whereas these I know superficially at face value, but they are a compare and contrast exercise. And separately, I'm happy to run through those, specific products if people are interested.
Yep. Completely agree. And as soon as when you said the magic word, the Apple word, well, I love my Apple devices. As we sit here doing this interview, I've got 3 separate different iPads as well as the MacBook that I work from to see what's coming in. And you just learn to live with that. And I don't think my business might fall down. And I know that's bad, because maybe I haven't got that data recovery bit because it's all Apple. But like you said, you can sync. You can just log in with your Apple ID to any new device and it will bring in all that stuff. And if you've got your contacts and everything there, it all syncs and comes together. So when I talk to clients and they say about Windows, I'm a bit of a dinosaur there now, because for so many years I've worked with Apple, and it's remembering the difference. I know when I first saw Windows 10, my God, I had to go do research, and I thought, no, that's not me. I'm techie. I know how to do this. And it was so different to what I was used to working with. That was a massive learning curve.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, I'm now going to... This is where we delve deep and get to know a bit more about Aytan, you see. Now, what would you have done differently in your life if you'd known then what you know now?
Yeah, so the point of my life that I'd probably go back to, so during my gap year, I was fortunate enough to get a work placement with a sister company of Saatchi & Saatchi Design House, called, well, at the time they were called Sector Light Design. So I think I spent about 3 or 6 months with them in London, just behind Tottenham Court Road. And I was effectively, a runner in-house, doing all the odd jobs that they just wanted me to do. But what it did is it gave me, direct access to the chief designer and another designer, exclusively on their projects. And I was just helping them to do all sorts of stuff. Some of it creative and some of it administrative, but, it was great exposure. I think they had a project with Christian Dior at the time, which was great. They were doing something, I think, for the Australian government, I think, as well. So yeah, that was really, really good exposure. It took me into London every day, and it reaffirmed to me that at that time I wanted to become a graphic designer, and going off to do a degree was the right thing. The learning point of that experience was I went off to uni, I did a degree, came back, and what I should have done is just stayed in London as a runner. And in those 4 years, I'd have probably been further ahead than, someone who was a graduate but had no, real work experience. So it's not to say that I wouldn't do the social element of university again, but from an academic perspective, that was my kind of lesson learned, to say, if you genuinely wanted to be a graphic designer, don't worry about a degree, get yourself into a design house, run around for a couple of years, and then, you're going to get proper work experience in a creative environment. So yeah, that was my lesson learned, to do something differently.
Yeah, well, I could completely attest to that. My degree I did as a mature student, set my first company up, did my degree full time, and did my divorce all at the same time. So I was a single mum doing my degree, and I did it in English. Yet, yes, it means I can write well. I'm publishing quality written work, but that doesn't equate to the digital stuff that I do. And again, the recruitment side you and I have done, when we've done campaigns for apprenticeships, because there's a whole generation that lost that apprenticeship idea. It was all pushed that you go to uni, you learn that way. And then we lost people that could actually do the job. Whereas from a university perspective, you learn the strategy behind it, you learn the thinking, but you can't physically implement what needs to be done. You can suggest how you would go about it, but from the apprenticeship side, like you say, stay in learning from others that have already done that work. That whole process has been lost for a whole generation, most definitely.
Yeah, agreed.
See, this is where I get on my high horse about certain things, but that's just something. It's so good to see the apprenticeship programs coming back in again. And it goes out to anyone listening to this that might be of a certain age and you're thinking, where am I going next? Do what you love. And like you say, work in an environment and learn from that. All my digital knowledge is self-taught. And yes, it's of a very high caliber, but I didn't go to university to learn that. You learn from the best, you learn from mentors. If you're of a stage, I'd say, yes, grab a mentor, maybe reach out to Aytan or myself and say, who do you know, how can you help me? in the future, because I'm sure we could set you on, or companies, if you want us to go in and speak to people and say, this is what we can do. I'm here. I'm probably speaking for both of us, but I hope you agree. Yes, we're here. We'll come and speak to people if they need it. Because
absolutely, definitely.
Right. So we will put the links in the description, as I said before, ways that you can connect with Aytan. Right. I'm now going to ask you, what is your biggest challenge and why?
Yeah, so I guess I briefly touched upon this point earlier, actually, inadvertently. But yeah, one of my biggest challenges at the moment is convincing companies that they don't necessarily need to spend their money on the big four or the top 10 consultancies to get the same, or indeed even better, information, services and solutions from smaller and independent consultancies who actually have, practical specialists and not necessarily textbook graduates. No disservice to the grads. I mean, I've worked with most of the big four who land some great graduates on partner programs that are incredibly intelligent, articulate. The one slight, I suppose, downfall is once they get to a point where the textbook can't answer the question, you've got a couple of options. One, they have to go off and figure it out, and that might take a week or two. Or they then have to, call in a team leader who, is even more expensive on a day rate than the original consultant. So that's my sort of challenge. And I'll be sort of positive to say that in the last sort of couple of years, that conversation with clients and potential clients has actually become, one, a bit easier, and two, a bit more sort of encouraging that they will engage, our services and not necessarily a big four. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, pick me instead of EY or Deloitte, because, we do completely different things. But it's that situation where don't let the problem compound so much over the course of 2 or 3 years that you do have to bring, one of the giants in. I call it proactive prevention rather than reactive resolution. Yeah. So because I am a small consultancy, if you bring me in early at the proactive stage, my relative size will be able to deal with and help you. If you bring me in at the back end when it's a monster problem, then yes, I have to admit I don't have the resources or the capacity to help you. And that's when they have a dependency on the big four or the top 10, because they have armies and armies of people and resources. So yeah, I guess it's not my biggest challenge anymore, but it certainly has been in the past. But more and more companies are realizing the benefits of using, as you say, SMEs, and whether that is a subject matter expert or a small medium enterprise. So applicable in both senses.
Yep. And I completely agree. And you just happened to touch on one of my things when I get on my soapbox. I'm terrible with this, because it is. And like you say, yes, the big consultancies, they're big for a reason. They have a fantastic way that they can interact, that they can deliver. But again, I go back to that conversation we had earlier in this interview, where you go for an agency and you speak to a director level that is actually winning the contract, then the people you work with maybe don't have quite as much information. And like you and I, yes, we've worked with the big consultancies when we go into the large corporations. And sometimes, yes, textbook, when they're looking at doing a whole transformation process and they're looking at a target operating model, that's textbook. But then you take it out of the textbook and you actually put people and an already established operations team and delivery team. Sometimes they cannot connect the dots. That's where you and I come in and help and almost do the dialogue between client and consultancy agency, and we blend the two together, because there is that. And yes, everyone starts on their journey in one way, and it's a massive learning curve, and it's great for your career if you can land straight from uni as a graduate into those large consultancies. you're probably set for life, because then you can move forward. But
absolutely, you know, as I say, their development programs, their training programs, you know, they are amazing. You know, they're structured, they're slick, you know, they're corporate, they have longevity. And yes, you know, if that's the kind of path you want to commit to for, you know, 10 or 15 years, you know, you can be an associate partner or partner, you know, late 30s, early 40s, no problem at all. It's just, you know, you sell your soul a little bit to do that, because it's a long-winded program. But yeah, I think, you know, what I've seen with lots of organizations is that they sometimes probably have an element of assurance level by engaging, you know, said consultancies, paying the premium for it, but they feel perhaps, you know, more assured, as I say, that what's going to be delivered, you know, safeguards them from risk. You know, we fear what we don't understand or we don't know, and, you know, independents are perhaps not as well known as a brand, so, you know, they're afraid to engage us as opposed to engaging the big ones. So yeah, I totally get that, but, you know, we weave our way into opportunities in different ways.
Definitely. And I'm going to put a cry out and literally say to anyone listening to this, mix it up a bit. Try the consultancies and try the likes of Aytan and myself, and bring us in and see what value we add. You just have to look at the testimonials we both have on the likes of LinkedIn that are corporate clients and customers that have actually written about the work we've done as an individual, and they can actually say, yes, that person delivers on this, this and this, and I can prove it. Give us a go, because we can deliver, probably save your budget for what you'd pay the big five for 1 year. You could have us for 5 years and we deliver the whole process. And like Aytan says, we come in at the beginning, so you don't need the massive teams to put something right, because we stop you going off the rails, as it were, on your journey. Transformation is always a journey, but if you take us on from the beginning, we can help your transformation run smoothly, and then you don't need to call in the larger teams. So I will get off of my high horse now. Now, this next question, I have been told, but it's quite egocentric. Now, I must admit, I didn't think that it was anything to do with the ego when I wrote it, but here we go. Aytan, how do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, so I suppose it's a slightly soppy an answer to this, but, you know, I'd like to be remembered as a good father first and foremost, but hopefully also a guy who, made a few mistakes along the way, but ultimately always operated with transparency and integrity, you know, going back to the values we spoke about earlier. So, yeah, I don't think I'll be remembered for one thing. You know, I'm certainly not, you know, an influencer or a celebrity or, you know, someone that's created a product that's revolutionized the industry or changed people's lives. So, you know, I won't make an impact in that way. But hopefully, you know, remembered by the people that matter for what I've just mentioned.
Yeah, and definitely. Well, I know anyone that sees any of your posts on LinkedIn, the posts with your son are absolutely fantastic. They are brilliant. I'm always riveted when you start a Lego project. I love that, because then I can see how it's growing and where you work together and you sort it all out. It is just brilliant. And I say to any of the listeners, if you haven't caught any of that, make sure you follow Aytan on LinkedIn, because his posts get more engagement than anyone else in my network. It's authentic, it's true to life, and I think we can all resonate with it in so many different ways.
He's so I refer to him as my chief marketing officer for exactly that reason, because, you know, I know if I put a post on about anything and he's in there, it probably multiplies the engagement by, you know, 3 to 5 at least. And, you know, I do try to make it a bit of fun sometimes, and I will try and make the posts pertinent to work, but with a twist rather than just, you know, the posts of mine that get the least engagement are the most professional ones. The ones where I, you know, put a bit of, you know, my own life into it, or, bring Oz into the picture. All of a sudden, out goes the principles of of LinkedIn, and it becomes, Facebook. But people seem to like it, so long may it continue. He's my little secret sauce for marketing.
And those posts are brilliant. Like I say, I go back to how you want to be remembered. Exactly. You're already on track for that, because you do epitomise everything you mentioned there. You really do.
Thank you.
Right. Now to go back to your childhood. As a child, what did you want to be, and how close to that dream are you now?
Yeah, so there wasn't one single job. I guess, through my kind of early childhood and formative years, I've always had a love of cars. I think that still is the case now. But I did want to be a mechanic. I was intrigued by the sort of the engines and the engineering of the vehicles. Then, it gets sort of drummed into you as a kid, you need to do something successful. And, I was always interested in law and, debating and arguing with people. So I quickly came away from that when I realized it was 7 years to become a lawyer. And then, I was interested in graphic design and marketing. My father's an architect, so I grew up in a house full of technical drawings and plans everywhere. But I was always interested in kind of logo design and branding, which I think, again, although it hasn't become a career, there are elements of my current role that I, really enjoy. And when someone says, let's come up with a website design or a landing page or a careers page, I'm all over that with the teams, creative, internally and externally. But yeah, when I graduated, the graphic design thing never really sort of took off. And then, the cliche of falling into recruitment came along a year or two later.
Now, anyone that listens to my podcast will know I have a favourite word, and it begins with S, and it's synchronicities. And listening to what you're saying, the synchronicities between yours and my careers and what we wanted to do. I wanted to do law as a child. They used to say, what do you want to do? And I'd say, I'm going to be Prime Minister. I'm going to do a law degree, be a barrister and be Prime Minister. Because I'm of an age where we had a female Prime Minister who had followed that sort of thing. And I thought, that's the way a woman leader, that's what I need to do. But saying that, when you looked at law, and again, I looked at how long it took, and then I looked at networks even then. Who do you know in law that will help you actually buy into a practice? And is synchronicities and the whole idea of debating and everything. I can see why we get on so well, just learning about that. Lots of similarities there.
And I think, I think those kind of subconscious desires of my childhood to be a lawyer or to be a designer or a mechanic, as I say, they have continued through my life in terms of, I'm not a qualified lawyer, but I often do lots of work with procurement teams, supplier frameworks, legal teams, legal counsels, looking at contracts. So, there's still a personal and professional interest and appetite for those things. As I say, the mechanical stuff, I don't think it's any coincidence. I did a lot of construction and engineering in my early days, and then a passion for cars, continues now. And then, the creative stuff, as I mentioned, comes into a lot of the advertising campaigns and recruitment campaigns that we undertake. So, yeah, I perhaps didn't realise the childhood dreams in a role or a career, but they're certainly part of my career to date in a completely different industry.
And and like you say, it does impact in what you're doing going forward. Now, you've mentioned cars. Anyone that knows my career path, I've worked with Jaguar Land Rover. I worked with them when Land Rover brought out the Evoque, so I helped with the marketing of that and pulling it together. And then this is where hindsight, and as you're very new and learning, I then worked for an agency that worked with Mercedes and Lamborghini, and I helped them with their social media. But at the time, I didn't know how to send an invoice, so I did it all for free. So we don't share that very often, but I've just shared it to millions now because they can listen to it. But in saying that, I know there are set automotive companies that you would love to work with. So I'm going to say now, give a massive shout out, because anyone listening that knows and can introduce Aytan to the right people, this is your chance, because he knows what he's doing, he knows how to deliver, and I know he would help them. So go. I know there's automotive companies.
So if I could work with a car manufacturer for Oz, it would absolutely be McLaren. And we've had some engagement recently, but any more would be wonderful. I think from a brand perspective, Ferrari, is at the pinnacle of what they do. And from a personal consumer perspective, I do own a Porsche, which I'm very proud of. And I'd love to work for the employer brand as much as the consumer brand. So McLaren, Ferrari and Porsche, if you're listening, give me a shout. Bugatti or Lamborghini, I wouldn't say no to you guys either.
So thank you for that. And I say to all the listeners, please, this is a big shout out. Let's show what social media and networking can do. If you know someone in your network that we can introduce Aytan to, let's make this happen, because I know he can deliver in so many ways and help. And wouldn't that make a great story to have you back and telling the story for that? Now, that would be wonderful. Now, and also, I will always add ways that you can reach out and connect with Aytan in the description. So if you're thinking, but I know someone, how do I introduce them? All those ways that you can connect will be in the description. So make sure, let's make this happen. I'm now moving. This is the one bit where I'm quite selfish in this podcast, because it's a thing that I love. And I know from some of the posts I've followed for you, I think it's something you could add so much value to. Can you name 3 titles of your favourite books and why you've chosen them, please?
Yeah, sure. I've only got 2, unfortunately. I was stewing on the 3rd one, and then I've forgotten to write it down. But the 2 that I have got, Black Box Thinking is a book that I've read earlier this year, actually before lockdown hit us, but it really sort of resonated with me afterwards as well. I just think as a book and as a concept, it's so relevant to how we can continually learn in life and in work. And I've written a post recently about black box thinking in recruitment to kind of tie those 2 together. The other book is written by a reasonably controversial character. I mean, personally, I think he's brilliant. He's one of the smartest and most articulate thinkers I've come across in recent years. I think his YouTube videos do him a bit more justice, but his book 12 Rules of Life by Dr. Peterson, anyone that engages this guy for an argument is in for a torrid time, because rightly or wrongly, in terms of what he believes, he brings objectivity and comprehensive thinking to discussions in a way not many people do. So as I say, forget what his views might be personally, it's the way he argues a point that kind of I find really, really sort of interesting and I suppose, inspiring to a degree. Like, his level of intelligence is out of this world. I did read a book recently by Stephen Hawkins, which I forget the title of, but again, the content is very heavy, but the subject in terms of, the meaning of life and, what's out there, etc., was written in such a way that, if he was still thinking about those things without the answers, then, we've all got sort of half a chance of coming up with what the answers might be. So, yeah, they're my 3 books that spring to mind.
That's absolutely brilliant. So they're going to go on my list so that I can add them, and my list gets longer and longer. And like you say, where so much today where we see this whole idea of fake news and everything, the media goes down a certain leaning, and to actually have the refreshing option to see an overview from different sides of a debate, I think a lot of people are lacking that. That I know when I was at uni, they spoke about Foucault, one of the French philosophers, and he said that history now is made up of the media. We don't know if we've even ever seen a true dissemination of what happened, because it's seen through the eye of the media, and that's always is almost tainted in a way to see in a certain way. So to see that, definitely going to look on YouTube and see and look at that. So that's another thing that'll be my bedtime listening, which means I won't get any sleep because I'll get into it. But
he's got some great interviews, and they're usually, you know, sort of 6 to 10 minute snippets. And there are longer ones, but yeah, you can get the gist from the shorter ones as well.
And that's something I'd say to anyone listening. Make sure when you're looking at a subject, look at that in a 360 view, get everyone's opinions. We can see even from this COVID thing where they've said, I can remember the pictures they showed of people supposedly 2 meters aside, but because of the way where the photographer stood, it looked like they were exactly just right next to each other. But if you said from a different viewpoint, you could see they were actually adhering to what was needed and keeping the 2 meter thing. But that's 2 perspectives looking at the same thing, and you can take 2 different answers from it. So it is 360, learn everything there is before you make the judgment, because if you take just one input, you only see one side.
Definitely.
Now, this almost towards our last question, we've got a few more to go. Who would you say are your key influencers and why?
Yeah, so I was having a conversation with a friend at the weekend about influencers, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine because typically it draws people to somebody famous or somebody obvious to be an influencer. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of the term, and to me, very few are genuinely influencers. I just respect people that have a purpose, good values, and relevance to what they do, and people with sustained, incredible success. Now, you know, there's lots of obvious names out there from, you know, huge companies that, you know, we all know and love. So it's not necessarily that I admire them as an influencer, but these are the people that have genuinely been influential in business or in people's lives for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, rather than someone that pops up, pays for marketing, has a brand or a product like hanging off them, and that's deemed as an influencer. That to me is not, you know, influential. That's just marketing, and it's done well. So yeah, I prefer people that have, you know, ridden the roller coaster for a period of time, long or short, and genuinely sort of imparted some sort of wisdom or influence onto people. So yeah, I don't have one person, but there are people out there that I'll certainly follow and listen to.
I love that answer, and actually that reflects most of the really good guests I've had on the podcast have given a similar answer. The ones that come out with those key names that we all know and love don't necessarily go into as much depth as those that will fight back and push back and say, actually, I'm not going to give you a name. I'm going to say that certain attributes from lots of different people become attributes that I'm influenced by, as opposed to a person, which I think shows far greater understanding. So with that, I say a massive thank you for that, because that's the sort of answers I like, and it's what the audience like as well.
Good.
Right, this is now my longest question. I have to do a great big deep breath for this, because I thought, I'm sure there's going to be an easier way to word it, but here goes. If you could share a great meal with anyone, alive or dead, what would the meal be and who would it be with?
Yeah, so I think I went for about 3 people in the end, and 2 of them actually linked to a question that you asked a few minutes ago. So Enzo Ferrari and Ferdinand Porsche, I'd love to meet, because obviously they were the founders of 2 brands that we've just spoken about that I love since childhood. And then I'd also be intrigued to meet Leonardo da Vinci. I did part of my dissertation was on Leonardo, not only because of the work that he did, but I think as a mind, in terms of when he lived, and the way that he thought and visualized things is incredible. So I'd love to meet him if that was possible. And nice and simple, a nice steak would be my meal of choice.
Oh, this I love, and this again is almost like a selfish bit when I throw that in, because can you imagine the conversations? Because some of these answers could make a complete and utter separate podcast on its own.
Yeah.
Just the ideas you talk about, what you could learn, and the meals. And it's like some people will say, like, they don't want it to be just one meal. They want it to last for days because they want to ask so many different questions. And it's having a meal that you love with the people you want to learn from. And that's just wonderment and joy. And you know that it's something you'll always remember. And it's just, I know it's buts and maybes, but it's wonderful. Really, really like that. So we are almost at the end of this interview. We've got two last questions, but I'm going to throw them together because I think they do actually fit together. What services or items do you offer to your clients or customers? And do you have any special offers at present, Aytan?
Yeah. So I guess what I do in terms of, specialising in the world of recruitment and talent acquisition breaks down into sort of four, I suppose, services. Consultation, so that can be relatively ad hoc. Retained advice, so maybe for a period of 3 to 6 months. Project management, and then more traditional kind of interim coverage, 3, 4, 5 days a week for a given period of time. Typically in 3 key areas, so strategy and operating models, supply chain frameworks, and technology implementation. So they're the 3 main areas. And then in terms of any offers at the moment, so obviously with COVID, committing to a reasonably expensive resource, for a period of time is perhaps not a priority at the moment. But I've created a starter pack that includes, I think it's about 5 or 6 topics that we've pretty much covered most of today. Hiring manager and interview assessment training, recruitment best practice, how to create a strategy and operating model, pros and cons of those models, and there's a white paper in there as well. So that starter pack also comes with 4 hours of consultation, which is valid for 6 months. So hopefully during the kind of quieter, leaner times, it can be a reference document, but then those 4 hours can maybe help with some planning. And that kind of collective pack at the moment is £750 plus VAT, and is available digitally, or I can send it out on a small USB drive as well.
That's absolutely fantastic. And like I said to the audience when we first started this, I've worked with Aytan personally. He delivers. What he does is fantastic. You get results. Large and small companies alike get fantastic results. All of these ways that you can connect will be put in the description, and it just leads me to say a massive, massive thank you for being.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for the invite. It's been a real pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I will ask one last question that I asked. It's been such a great interview. Would you come back as a guest for the future, and we can cover different topics and everything? Because I love
absolutely, yeah. I'm more than happy to come back again. And the questions that you presented for today were brilliant. I think they were a really good blend between some personal insight, some professional insight, and just some topics that you wouldn't necessarily think to discuss. So no, really good stuff, and I'd be more than happy to come back.
That's absolutely brilliant. So I just say a massive thank you. Thank you for being a guest today.
Have a good one.